The day I found out my husband had been stealing from me, I was holding a pen in my hand, about to sign a document that would have made us both very rich. I remember the exact weight of that pen. It was one of those thick banker pens they keep chained to the desk, and I'd been clicking it nervously for about 3 minutes while the loan officer pulled up our account on her screen. It was a Tuesday in March, the kind of Tuesday that smells like burnt coffee and printer toner and nothing in particular. I had no idea that by the time I walked out of that building, everything I thought I knew about my life would be completely and permanently wrong. My name is Audrey. I'm 36 years old. I'm a licensed structural engineer, which means I spend my days making sure buildings don't fall down. I'm good at it. I understand load-bearing walls, stress fractures, the invisible places where pressure builds up until something gives. What I was not good at, apparently, was recognizing those same patterns in my own marriage. I met Wesley when I was 28. He was a contractor. Not the wealthy kind, not yet, just a guy with a work truck and a good handshake and a laugh that made the whole room turn around. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Sonoma. His mother, Rosamond, cried the entire time. She told me afterward that she'd never seen her son look at anyone the way he looked at me. I held on to that for years. I don't know why. We built something real together. Or I thought we did. I was the steadier income. Engineering firms pay well, and I'd been promoted twice by the time we were 30. But Wesley's contracting business grew fast once we started pooling resources. By the time we were in our mid-30s, we owned a home in Marin County, 3 investment properties across the Bay Area, and a business account with enough in it to feel genuinely secure for the first time in my adult life. Wesley was the face of the business. I was the infrastructure. That felt fine to me. I trusted him. I trusted him the way you trust the ground under your feet. Not because you've tested it recently, but because it's never failed you before. I should have tested it. The first crack appeared about 8 months before that Tuesday in the bank. I was working late. We were in the middle of a complicated retrofit project downtown, and I got home around 10 to find Wesley sit at the kitchen table with his laptop open and 3 empty beer bottles lined up beside him. He closed the laptop when I walked in. Fast. Not suspicious fast, just tired fast, that's what I told myself. He asked about my day. I told him. He nodded in the right places. We went to bed. But I noticed the bottles. Wesley didn't usually drink alone. 2 weeks later, I got a notification from our joint checking account. An automatic alert I'd set up years ago and mostly forgotten about. It flagged any withdrawal over $5,000. The amount that triggered it was $8,400. When I asked Wesley about it, he said it was a materials invoice, early payment discount. He showed me a receipt on his phone. It looked real. I told myself it was real. It happened again 6 weeks later, then again. Each time he had an explanation. Each time the explanation made sense on the surface. Each time I felt a small cold thing settle somewhere in my chest that I refused to name. I was afraid, I think. Not of Wesley specifically. Just of what it would mean if I was right. So I kept going. I kept signing off on joint tax returns without reading them closely enough. I kept smiling at Rosamond's weekly Sunday dinners. I kept working 70-hour weeks and telling myself that the unease I felt was just stress. Just the retrofit project, just life. Then my father had a heart attack in February. He survived. He's fine now. He's 71 and stubborn as a stump, and the doctors say his heart is actually in better shape than most men his age, which I choose to believe. But those 3 days in the ICU waiting rooms in Sacramento cracked something open in me. My father kept saying, between the monitoring equipment beeps, "Audrey, are you okay?" And I kept saying yes because that's what you say. But sitting in that plastic chair under those fluorescent lights, I realized I hadn't actually answered that question honestly in a long time. When I got back home, I made an appointment with our financial advisor. Not to investigate Wesley. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely wasn't suspicious in a concrete way. I told myself I just wanted to do a full picture review, get organized, feel like an adult. Our advisor, a meticulous woman named Philippa, pulled everything together and emailed me the summary the night before our meeting. I opened it at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, sitting in bed with Wesley asleep beside me. The numbers didn't add up. Not dramatically at first. Just off. Like a room where someone moved the furniture 2 inches and you can't immediately say what's wrong, but you know something is. I stared at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, made tea I didn't drink, and started doing math on a notepad. By 1 in the morning, I had found it. Over 14 months, $214,000 had moved out of our joint business account in a pattern that looked like operating expenses but wasn't. The invoices Wesley had on file didn't match the amounts. Some of the vendor names appeared twice, billed twice for the same dates. One of them, an LLC called Brightland General Contracting, didn't appear to exist at all when I searched the California Secretary of State's business registry. $214,000. Gone. I sat very still in my kitchen for a long time. I'm not a dramatic person. I don't have a talent for screaming or throwing things. What I have is a very particular kind of stillness that comes over me when I'm trying to solve a structural problem. When I can feel a building telling me something is wrong, and I need to listen carefully before I do anything at all. That same stillness came over me in my kitchen at 1 a.m. I didn't wake Wesley. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and made a list of everything I would need to find out. Then I went back to bed and lay next to my husband in the dark and said nothing. The next morning, I called Philippa and asked her to pull every transaction from the business account for the past 18 months and send it to me in a format I could work with. Then I called a lawyer. Not a lawyer I knew socially, not someone who might mention it to someone who might mention it to Wesley. I searched for an attorney who specialized in financial fraud within domestic partnerships. I found a woman named Octavia who had a no-nonsense website and a first consultation fee that made me wince. But she had reviews that said things like, she saw through everything immediately, and I wish I'd called her sooner. I called her that afternoon from my car, in the parking garage at work. I told Octavia everything. The alerts, the invoices, Brightland General, the spreadsheet, all of it. She was quiet for a moment on the other end. Then she said, "Don't touch anything. Don't confront him. Don't move any money. Don't change any passwords. Don't let him know you know. Call me back when you have the full transaction history from Philippa and I'll tell you what we're looking at." I asked her, "How bad could it be?" She said, "Let's find out before we decide how to feel about it." That was the hardest part. 14 days of not knowing how bad it was, while pretending I knew nothing at all. 14 days of Sunday dinners with Rosamund, who kept refilling my wine glass and asking when Wesley and I were going to finally start thinking about kids. And 14 days of sleeping in the same bed. As a man, I was beginning to understand I didn't know at all. Wesley didn't act guilty. That was the thing that kept making me doubt myself. He was affectionate. He brought home groceries without being asked. He fixed a broken cabinet hinge I'd mentioned in passing. He was the man I married, or the version of that man I'd been sold. And I kept looking at him across the dinner table thinking, which part is the performance? All of it? None of it? Can a person lie about something this large and still believe they love you? I didn't know. I still don't, completely. Octavia called me back on a Wednesday. She'd brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet, detail-oriented man named Frederick, and they'd gone through everything Philippa sent over. The number wasn't $214,000. It was $340,000 over 22 months, moving through 3 shell entities, 2 of which trace back to a woman named Tara. Tara. I didn't know a Tara. I asked Octavia to say it again. She did. She said the shell company called Brightland General Contracting was registered to a Tara Holloway, currently residing in an apartment in Redwood City. An apartment, Octavia said carefully, where Wesley's truck had been parked on 4 separate occasions in the past 6 weeks. According to the private investigator Octavia had retained on my behalf the day after our first call. I was in my car again when I got this call. Same parking garage, different day. I looked at the concrete pillar in front of me for a very long time. "Audrey," Octavia said, "are you with me?" "Yes," I said. "Keep going." There's a thing that happens when you get news like that. Your brain splits. One part of you is listening to the words, Tara Holloway, Redwood City, 4 separate occasions, and the other part has detached completely and is floating somewhere near the ceiling, watching you sit in a car, in a parking garage getting the worst news of your life. I was aware of both parts simultaneously. The floating part was almost peaceful. The listening part was taking notes. I asked Octavia what came next. She said we had 2 options, move now or wait and build more. If we moved now, we could freeze the joint accounts immediately, file for divorce, and present what we had to a judge. It was substantial. The documentation was strong. But if we waited another 3 to 4 weeks and allowed Frederick to complete a full forensic trace of all 3 shell entities, we would have an airtight case, one that potentially involved wire fraud, which is federal, not just civil. And federal wire fraud meant Wesley wouldn't just lose the marriage. He might lose his contractor's license and face criminal prosecution. She asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about my father in the hospital bed. I thought about Rosamund asking about children. I thought about the beer bottles, the fast laptop clothes, the cold thing I'd refused to name. We wait, I said, and we build. So I went home. I cooked dinner. I asked Wesley about his day. He told me about a kitchen renovation in Tiburon, a client who kept changing their mind about the backsplash tile. I nodded. I laughed in the right places, and somewhere in the back of my head, a very calm, very quiet part of me was counting days. 3 weeks later, Octavia called and said we were ready. The plan was this. We needed Wesley to sign something. Octavia had structured a completely legitimate document, a refinancing authorization for one of our investment properties in Oakland. And getting Wesley's notarized signature on it would establish, for the record, his acknowledgement of joint ownership over all our shared assets at that specific point in time. It was a routine step, the kind of thing spouses sign all the time, and Wesley wouldn't think twice about it. Once he'd signed and we had the notarized record, Octavia could proceed to the next phase, filing simultaneously for divorce and for a civil fraud claim, with the wire fraud referral already drafted and ready for the U.S. Attorney's Office. There was only one small thing I had to do. I had to go to the bank first. The appointment at Wells Fargo I'd scheduled for that Tuesday to complete the initial paperwork on my end. Routine. 30 minutes, in and out. Then I'd come home, Wesley would sign the refinancing authorization in front of the notary I'd arranged, and it would be done. I want to tell you I was brave about this. That I walked into Wells Fargo that Tuesday morning with my head up, and my hands steady and my heart at a normal rate. I did walk in with my head up. But my hands were not completely steady, and my heart was doing something that wasn't quite its normal rate. And when the loan officer, a calm woman named Beverly, said, "I just need to pull up your account, Mrs." And then she paused and looked at her screen and said, "I'm sorry, I want to make sure I have the right file. Can you confirm the address on the Oakland property?" I felt the first pull of something wrong. Beverly had a very professional face. She kept it professional now. But there was something in the way she tilted her head at the screen. Just slightly, just a fraction, that made that cold thing in my chest spread out toward my fingertips. She said, "I'm seeing a notation on this account. I need to ask, are you aware of a power of attorney filed on this property in November?" I set the pen down. "I'm sorry," I said. Beverly turned the monitor toward me slightly. On the screen was a scanned document, a power of attorney authorizing the management and disposition of the Oakland property, signed with my name, dated November 14th of the previous year. I have a very distinctive signature. I've had it since I was 19, and I've never changed it. A hard leftward slant on the A, the Y dropping long below the line. The signature on Beverly's screen had my name. It did not have my signature. Someone had signed for me. Someone who knew my name and my account number and the address of the property, but who had never, apparently, studied the way I write. The pen was still on the desk. I became aware, in a distant way, that I was very glad it was chained there, because otherwise I might have been gripping it hard enough to leave marks. "No," I said, in a voice that came out remarkably even. I was not aware of that. Beverly's professional face stayed exactly where it was. She said, "I think we need to get the branch manager." I said, "Yes, I think you're right." I texted Octavia from under the desks while Beverly went to get the manager. 3 words. "It's worse. Bank." She called me back in 40 seconds. I stepped outside. I told her what Beverly had shown me. The November power of attorney, the signature that wasn't mine. Octavia was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "Don't sign anything today. Tell them you need to consult your attorney, and you'll be back. Stay calm. Don't say anything about what you know." I said, "What does the POA mean? What could he have done with it?" She said, "Audrey, I need you to trust me right now. Go back in, be polite, tell them you'll be in touch, and then go to your car and call me back." I went back in. I was polite. I told Beverly and the branch manager, a careful, soft-spoken man named Douglas, that I'd need to consult my attorney before proceeding, and that I'd be in touch within 24 hours. Douglas gave me his card. He also, very quietly, suggested that I might want to place a temporary hold on any account activity until things were clarified. He said it the way people say things when they know more than they're telling you, but can't tell you yet. I said, that sounded like a good idea. I walked to my car. I sat down. I called Octavia. She already had Frederick working on it by the time I dialed. The power of attorney had been filed in November, which meant it had been in place for almost 5 months. During those 5 months, if it was valid, Wesley would have had legal authority to act on my behalf with respect to the Oakland property, to lease it, to modify the mortgage, to, potentially, take out a line of credit against it. There was a line of credit. Octavia told me this at about 3 in the afternoon, while I was sitting at my desk at work, pretending to review load calculations for the retrofit project. Frederick had found it. $280,000, drawn against the equity in the Oakland property, in 4 separate draws over 5 months, all authorized under the power of attorney bearing my forged signature. I looked at my load calculations for a long time. I want to tell you, I cried. But I didn't. Not then. That floating, detached feeling came back, the parking garage feeling, and I just sat there with the numbers on the screen in front of me and thought, he forged my name. He didn't just take money. He forged my name and used it to take money. He made me complicit in something without my knowledge or my consent. He used my identity the way you'd use a tool, something to pick up and put down when it was useful. I thought about all the times he'd asked me to sign things quickly. Just the standard stuff, babe. I'll explain later. I thought about how I'd always been the one who read contracts, and he'd always been the one who was impatient with that. I thought about how I'd started signing faster, started trusting more, because that's what you do when someone is your partner. You trust them with your pen. At 5 o'clock, I drove home. Wesley was already there. He was grilling chicken on the back deck, and when he heard me come through the sliding door, he turned around and smiled. That wide, easy Wesley smile, and said, "Perfect timing. You hungry?" I said yes. I sat down in one of the deck chairs. I watched him turn the chicken. I had known Wesley for 8 years. I had been married to him for 6. I thought about Tara Holloway in her apartment in Redwood City. I thought about $280,000 and a forged signature and the way he'd chained the pen to his life and then used it as he liked. "Good day?" he asked. "Busy," I said. "You?" "Tiburon client finally picked the tile," he said. "The gray limestone." I told her that's what she should have gone with from the beginning. I smiled at him. "You were right. We ate on the deck." He talked about the Tiburon job, a neighbor's new landscaping, a podcast he'd been listening to. I said the right things. I had gotten very good, in the past 3 weeks, at saying the right things. After dinner, I told Wesley that Octavia had asked if we could reschedule the Oakland refinancing signing for Thursday, instead of Tuesday. I said there was a small scheduling conflict, completely routine. He said fine, no problem, whatever worked. He kissed me on the top of my head before going inside to watch TV. I stayed on the deck for a while in the dark. The bay was visible from our yard on clear nights, just a flat black shine of it through the trees. I looked at it for a long time. Then I went inside and sent Octavia the message she was waiting for. "Thursday," he agreed. "We're ready." The next 48 hours were the strangest of my life. Not dramatic. That's the thing no one tells you about crisis. It's not dramatic. It's just very, very quiet. I went to work. I checked on the retrofit project. I called my father and talked about baseball for 20 minutes, which is our primary language of love. I slept, not well but enough. I kept my face the way Beverly had kept hers, professional, calm, slightly tilted. On Thursday morning, Octavia filed a protective order on both the Oakland property and our joint business accounts, before 7 a.m. By 9, she'd served the divorce petition to Wesley's attorney. An attorney Wesley didn't know I knew he had, but that Frederick had found through the paper trail tied to the shell companies. When Wesley's phone lit up with that call, he was sitting at our kitchen table with his coffee. I was getting my keys to leave for work. I watched him look at his phone. I watched his face change. It was the first time I'd seen something real on his face in 3 weeks. Maybe longer. He said my name. "Just Audrey," I said. "I know about Tara. I know about Brightland General. I know about the power of attorney. And I know about the line of credit on the Oakland property." I kept my voice very even. "My attorney has everything. There is nothing more to talk about here," he said. "Let me explain." I said, "You forged my signature." That's all I said. 3 words that were factually true, and that legally speaking, were exactly sufficient. Octavia had told me, "Say what happened, nothing more." So I said what happened. Then I picked up my keys and walked out the front door. I sat in my car for a moment in the driveway. My hands were shaking. Finally now, when it didn't matter anymore, I let them shake. I pressed them flat against my thighs and breathed the way I'd read somewhere. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It helped a little. Then I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway of the house I'd lived in for 5 years, and I drove to work. The legal process took 11 months. Octavia was worth every dollar of her fee. The forged power of attorney was confirmed by a forensic document examiner. The signature was inconsistent in 8 specific ways with my authenticated samples. The wire fraud referral was accepted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Brightland General Contracting was dissolved by court order, and the funds that remained traceable, about 60% of the total, which is better than Octavia had initially hoped, were ordered returned to me as part of the divorce settlement. Wesley's contractor's license was suspended pending the fraud investigation. He lost the Tiburon job and 3 others he had in progress. Rosamund called me once, in the early months, and said something that I think she meant to be comforting but wasn't, and I told her I wished her well and ended the call and blocked her number. I don't regret that. What surprised me about the months after was how ordinary they were. I had expected devastation, and there was some of it. Nights when the gray limestone tile detail hit me, out of nowhere, or when I drove past a contractor's truck and had to breathe through something complicated. But mostly what I felt was tired, and then less tired, and then, slowly, something I hadn't felt in years, certain of what I knew, certain of what I could do with what I knew, certain of the ground under my feet. I'm a structural engineer. I know how to read the places where pressure builds until something gives. I know the difference between a building that has failed and a building that is telling you it needs to be rebuilt differently. I spent too long standing inside my own life, feeling the weight wrong, telling myself it was fine. It wasn't fine, but I learned from it what it took to fix it. My father asked me recently, we were watching a Giants game, him in his chair, me on the couch with a beer, whether I was okay. The question he'd asked me in the ICU waiting room, the one I'd answered automatically. This time I thought about it. Yeah, I said. I actually am. He looked at me for a second, then he looked back at the game. Good, he said, about time.